The massive starship Celestial Horizon hung silent against the darkness of space. Its metal skin gleamed with technologies beyond human understanding, a marvel of engineering that had crossed countless light years. Commander Daewon Park stood on the bridge, his four-fingered hands carefully positioned on the navigation controls. Outside the ship's reinforced windows, a blue and green planet slowly grew larger. Earth, a world that should have been just another data point in the Arcali's vast galactic database. But something was different about this planet. Jiho Kang, the ship's lead xenobiologist, moved between holographic displays. His long fingers danced across screens filled with streams of information. Numbers, graphs, and complex readings told a story that made no sense. Humans were primitive by Arcali standards. Their technology was basic. Their civilization was young. And yet, something about their data was wrong. "Commander," Joe called out, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. "The human behavioral patterns are inconsistent with our predictive models." Daewon turned, his large, almond-shaped eyes, typical of Arcali physiology, narrowed with interest. The Arcali had mapped thousands of civilizations. They knew exactly how emerging species behaved, or so they thought. The computer screens showed conflicting information. In one moment, humans appeared to be destroying their own planet. In the next, they were healing wounded animals, building complex structures, creating art. They fought devastating wars, and then immediately worked to rebuild what they had destroyed. They could be cruel and kind in the same breath. "Look at this," Jiho said, pulling up a series of images. One showed humans fighting in a war zone, weapons raised. The next image, from the same location, showed those same people helping children, sharing food, treating wounded enemies with care. Daewon moved closer. His species had never seen anything like this. The Arcali were logical. They made decisions based on perfect calculations. If something was not beneficial, they did not do it. But humans seemed to operate on something else entirely, something the ship's advanced computers could not fully understand. "Their emotional range is impossible," Joe muttered, more to himself than to the commander. The Celestial Horizon continued its approach. Sophisticated scanning systems mapped every inch of the planet. They detected nuclear facilities, primitive rocket technologies, vast communication networks, and something else, something the Arcali had never seen in a young civilization: hope. Despite all evidence of potential destruction, the humans seemed to believe they could solve their problems. They created systems to protect their environment. They built hospitals. They sent rescue teams to help strangers on the other side of their planet. They dreamed of exploring space, even with their limited technology. "Commander," a junior officer interrupted, "we're picking up multiple communication signals. They're talking to each other, constantly." Daewon watched the screens. Millions of communication threads crossed the planet every second. Conversations about everything and nothing. Jokes, arguments, love, conflict, resolution. "Prepare initial contact protocols," Daewon ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew something was different about this mission. The Arcali had encountered hundreds of civilizations. But humans? Humans were going to be something else entirely. Little did they know how right he was. Yoonji Kim sat in the communications center of the Celestial Horizon surrounded by a web of blinking screens and humming translation devices. His job was simple: understand human communication. But nothing about humans was simple. The first transmission came through as a jumble of sounds and images. Yoongi's advanced translation algorithms worked overtime, breaking down each sound, each gesture, each tiny movement of human communication. And yet, something always seemed missing. "This makes no sense," he muttered to himself. On the screen, a human diplomatic representative named Elena Rodriguez was speaking. Her words seemed straightforward enough, but her body told a different story. She smiled, a strange movement of facial muscles that the Arcali translation systems could not comprehend. The Arcali communication protocols were built on pure logic. Words meant exactly what they said. Gestures had precise meanings. But humans spoke in layers. They said one thing and meant another. They used something called sarcasm, a communication method that made absolutely no sense to the Arcali. In one recorded transmission, Alina was discussing a serious diplomatic matter. Her words were calm and measured, but her smile, the Arcali systems initially interpreted it as a threat display, as if she was showing her teeth to signal violence. Yoongi played the transmission again and again. He zoomed in on her facial movements, the way her eyes crinkled, the slight tilt of her head. To an Arcali, it looked like a warning. To a human, it was a sign of connection. "Commander," Yoongi called out to Daewon, "I cannot make sense of human communication." Daewon approached the screen. His four-fingered hand touched the display, zooming in on Alina's face. "Explain," he said simply. Yoongi pulled up multiple transmissions. Humans used something called context in a way that broke all of the Arcali's communication models. They could say "I'm fine" when they were clearly not fine. They could laugh during serious moments. They could be angry without showing any signs of anger. "Look," Yoongi said, pulling up another transmission. This one was from a place humans called a comedy show. People were laughing, but not because anything dangerous was happening. They were laughing for fun. The Arcali had no equivalent for fun. Everything they did had a purpose, a clear, logical purpose. One transmission showed humans in what seemed to be a conflict, but instead of immediate violence, they were talking, negotiating, using something called compromise. When that failed, some of them even hugged each other, a gesture that made no logical sense in a conflict situation. "Their communication is a weapon," Daewon observed, "but not like any weapon we've seen before." Yoongi nodded. Human communication was fluid, emotional, impossible to predict. They could go from anger to laughter in seconds. They could be serious and playful in the same breath. They used metaphors that made no literal sense. They told stories that seemed to have no point. "We need more data," Yoongi said. But deep down, he knew that more data might not help. Humans were not a problem to be solved with more information. They were a mystery that required something else entirely. Something the Arcali had never needed before. Understanding. The Arcali High Council chamber was silent. Cold metal walls reflected the hard light of holographic displays showing Earth's data. Commander Daewon Park stood at the center, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon him. "The humans are a threat," announced High Counselor Tak, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Large screens showed human military bases, nuclear facilities, and complex communication networks. "They are unpredictable, dangerous." Daewon knew the argument well. The Arcali had encountered hundreds of civilizations. Most were dealt with quickly. Those showing potential for future conflict were neutralized before they could become a real problem. Efficiency was their greatest strength. But something about Earth was different. "Their technology is primitive," Tak continued, "but their potential for destruction is extreme. Look at their history. Holographic images flashed, wars, environmental damage, technological experiments that had nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times." Jiho Kang, standing to the side, watched carefully. As the lead xenobiologist, he had studied human data more closely than anyone else. Something about their data told a different story, a story of survival, of hope, of impossible recovery. The military leaders were already preparing. Massive weapon systems hummed to life. The Arcali had technology that could destroy entire planets in minutes. Their ships could move faster than light. Their weapons could break down matter at the molecular level. "We have three options," High Counselor Tak explained. "Complete elimination, controlled subjugation, or total quarantine." Elimination meant destroying Earth entirely. Subjugation meant reducing humans to a managed species, stripped of their independence. Quarantine would trap them on their planet, preventing any space exploration. Day One spoke up. We might be missing something about them. Silence filled the room. No Archeli had ever questioned the High Council's judgment before. Explain, Tak demanded. Day One pulled up more data. Images of human rescue operations, scientific discoveries, art, music, moments of incredible kindness mixed with moments of terrible conflict. Humans are not just a threat, he said. They are complex. The other council members looked uncomfortable. Complexity was not something the Archeli appreciated. They valued clear solutions, predictable outcomes. Jiho stepped forward. Our initial scans show something unique. Humans have survived multiple near-extinction events. They've overcome challenges that would have destroyed other species. They adapt in ways our models cannot predict. The military leaders looked skeptical. Adaptation was one thing. Survival was another. The Archeli had technology that could crush human resistance in moments. They fight, Day One continued, but they also heal. They destroy, but they also rebuild. Their most powerful weapon is not their technology, but their ability to work together. High Counselor Tak's eyes narrowed. Sentiment will not protect us from a potential threat. The decision was almost made. Elimination seemed the safest path. Humans were too unpredictable, too dangerous. Their potential for both creation and destruction made them a risk the Archeli could not accept. But something held them back. A tiny piece of data. A fragment of information that suggested humans were more than just another civilization to be managed or destroyed. They were something else entirely. And the Archeli were about to find out exactly what that meant. The simulation room buzzed with energy. Massive holographic displays showed a detailed model of Earth's defenses. Archeli military strategists worked quickly, running thousands of potential invasion scenarios every second. Jiho Kang watched closely. Something was wrong with every single simulation. In a typical encounter, most civilizations would show clear patterns. They would have predictable defense strategies. Weak points would be obvious. Resources would be concentrated in logical locations. Humans were different. The first simulation showed a standard Archeli attack strategy. Their ships would strike major population centers. Communication networks would be destroyed. Military bases would be neutralized. It was a perfect plan. But the human response made no sense. Instead of panicking, human defenders adapted instantly. When one communication network went down, they switched to another. When a military base was hit, civilians became part of the defense. They used technologies the Archeli couldn't predict. Old radio systems, satellite networks. Even amateur radio operators became part of a massive, living communication web. This is impossible, muttered an Archeli strategy analyst. In one simulation, human defenders used their own weaknesses as strengths. A destroyed bridge became a new defensive position. A damaged communication center became a hub for gathering information. Civilians with no military training became unexpected heroes. Jiho zoomed in on one particular simulation. A small group of humans had been cut off from their main defense network. By most standards, they should have been defeated immediately. Instead, they created their own communication system. They shared resources. They worked together in ways that broke all of the Archeli's predictive models. Look at this, Joe called to the other analysts. The holographic display showed something strange. When the Archeli attacked one part of a human city, people from other parts immediately began to help. They shared information. They moved resources. They adapted faster than any computer could calculate. The Archeli had technology that could destroy entire planets. But humans had something else: creativity. In one simulation, human defenders used old trucks as mobile communication centers. They used consumer electronics to track enemy movements. They shared information through networks that didn't follow any logical pattern. Their weakness is their strength, Jiho said quietly. The military analysts looked confused. The Archeli believed in perfect systems, perfect strategies. Humans believed in something else. the ability to change, to adapt, to survive. Another simulation showed human medical teams treating wounded enemies. Arcali military doctrine said this was illogical. Enemies should be neutralized, not helped. But humans seem to operate on a different level of understanding. We need more data, the lead analyst said. But Jiho knew more data wouldn't help. Humans weren't a problem to be solved with information. They were a mystery that required something the Arcali had never needed before: understanding. As the simulations continued, one thing became clear. The Arcali might have superior technology, but humans had something far more powerful: the will to survive, the ability to hope, the strength to change. The test chamber was silent. Arcali military experts watched carefully as a simulated conflict played out before their eyes. This was no ordinary training exercise. This was a chance to understand humans. Commander Daewon Park stood at the center of the room, his four-fingered hands moving across the control panel. The simulation began with a standard Arcali attack strategy: perfect, calculated, precise. Arcali combat units moved like machines. Each soldier knew exactly what to do. They followed instructions without question. Their movements were mathematical. Their reactions were instant. Every action was planned with zero margin for error. Then the human defenders entered the simulation. Nothing made sense. The human team did not move in straight lines. They did not follow expected patterns. When one path was blocked, they created new paths instantly. They talked to each other. They made jokes. They comforted each other when things got tough. "Look at this," Yeonji Kim said, pointing to the holographic display. An Arcali combat unit would have neutralized a threat instantly. A human team did something else entirely. When one team member was injured, others stopped to help. They carried wounded companions. They shared limited resources. In one moment of the simulation, a human soldier actually smiled while under heavy attack. The Arcali found this impossible to understand. Why would someone smile during a moment of extreme danger? Their communication systems could not process this behavior. The human defenders used everything around them as a potential tool. A broken radio became a communication device. An old truck became a mobile defense point. They recycled, rebuilt, and reimagined their environment faster than any computer could calculate. Jiho Kang watched carefully. His scientific mind tried to find a logical explanation for human behavior. But there was nothing logical about what he saw. The humans were loud. They argued. They laughed. Sometimes, they seemed to make decisions based on feelings rather than clear data. An Arcali combat team would never do this. An Arcali team was a perfect machine of war. But the human team was something else. A living, breathing system of cooperation. In one critical moment, the human team was completely surrounded. By all military calculations, they should have been defeated. But they found a way out. They used creativity. They used teamwork. They used something the Arcali could not understand: hope. The simulation ended. The Arcali experts looked confused. Their perfect battle algorithms had been completely destroyed by human unpredictability. They should not have survived, one analyst said. But they did survive. And more than that, they found a way to win that no computer could have predicted. Daewon Park looked at the simulation results. Something was changing in how he understood humans. They were not just another species to be categorized and managed. They were something more. The humans had shown something powerful, something the Arcali had never seen before: the ability to turn chaos into opportunity. The research center was quiet. Rows of data screens showed millions of pieces of information about humans. Jiho Kang sat in the middle of it all, his four-fingered hands moving slowly across the screens. Something big was happening. The Arcali had studied thousands of civilizations. They knew how young species developed. They knew exactly how technology grew. They knew how societies changed. But humans were different, completely different. Jiho pulled up another set of images. Human history was not a straight line. It was messy, complicated, filled with terrible mistakes and amazing recoveries. Other species, when faced with a major problem, would give up. Humans did something else. They fought. They changed. They rebuilt. One screen showed humans destroying their own environment. Another screen showed the same humans working hard to fix what they had broken. They created new technologies. They changed their ways of living. They solved problems that should have destroyed them. "Commander," Joe called to Day One Park, "you need to see this." The screens showed human achievements that made no sense. They had limited technology, limited resources, but they had something else, something the Archeli could not understand. Imagination. One image showed humans building a massive machine to study the smallest parts of the universe. Another showed humans protecting tiny animals from extinction. They spent resources on things that had no immediate value. They dreamed of exploring space when they could barely leave their own planet. Daewon looked closely. "Explain," he said simply. Jiho pulled up more data. Humans had survived multiple events that should have killed their entire species. Climate changes, massive wars, diseases. Each time, they found a way to survive. More than that, they found a way to improve. The Archeli believed in perfect systems. Humans believed in something else, the ability to change. One research document caught Jiho's eye. It showed how humans solved problems. They did not use perfect logic. They used something else: creativity, teamwork, the ability to think in ways no computer could predict. "Look at this medical research," Jiho said, pointing to a screen. Humans were developing treatments for diseases by working together. Scientists from different countries, different backgrounds. They shared information. They worked as one big team. The Archeli had never seen anything like this. Their own society was perfect. Each Archeli knew exactly what to do. Each Archeli followed the rules. Humans were different. They argued. They made mistakes. They tried again. Daewon watched the screens carefully. Something was changing in how he understood humans. They were not just another species to study. They were something more. The screens showed humans helping each other, humans creating art, humans exploring their world, humans dreaming of things that did not exist yet. "They are not a threat," Jiho said quietly. "They are something else entirely." The Archeli were about to learn a big lesson. Humans were not defined by their technology. They were defined by their hope. The diplomatic chamber was tense. Humans and Archeli sat across from each other, separated by more than just a physical table. They were separated by completely different ways of thinking. Elena Rodriguez represented Earth. She looked calm, too calm for a moment that could decide the fate of her entire species. Yeonji Kim watched carefully. As the Archeli communications specialist, his job was to translate more than just words. He needed to translate entire ways of thinking. "We understand your concerns," Elena said, her voice steady. "But humans are not a threat to be managed. We are a species that wants to learn, to grow." The Archeli diplomats looked confused. Their translator systems worked perfectly, but something always seemed missing. The space between her words held more meaning than the words themselves. "High Counselor," Tak spoke first. "Your history shows multiple conflicts. Destruction of your own environment. Wars that nearly ended your civilization. Why should we trust you?" Elena smiled. The Archeli translation systems went crazy. Was this a threat? A sign of weakness? A moment of connection? "Because we learn," she said simply. "We make mistakes, but we also fix them." Jiho Kang sat to the side, watching every detail. His scientific mind tried to break down human communication, but humans were not a problem to be solved with data. They were a mystery that required understanding. The Archeli showed images of human conflicts, wars, environmental damage, moments of terrible destruction. They expected Elena to defend these actions. She did something else entirely. "Yes," she said, "we have done terrible things. But we have also done amazing things. We have healed our planet. We have created art. We have helped each other in ways that make no logical sense. The Archeli diplomats looked uncomfortable. They believed in perfect systems. Humans believed in something else. The ability to change. Daewon Park watched carefully. Something was changing in how he understood humans. They were not trying to win an argument. They were trying to connect. We want to be part of something bigger, Elena continued. We want to learn, to explore, to understand. The Archeli had two choices: destroy humans or try to understand them. Yoongi noticed something strange. The humans were not presenting perfect data. They were telling a story. A messy, complicated story of a species that refused to give up. High Counselor Tak looked at the data. By all calculations, humans should have destroyed themselves many times over. But they survived. More than that, they grew. We have technology you cannot understand, the Archeli diplomat said. Elena nodded. We have something else. Hope, creativity, the ability to work together. The room went quiet. The Archeli had never heard anyone describe a strength that could not be measured by technology. Daewon saw something in Elena's eyes. It was not a threat. It was not a weakness. It was something else entirely. The possibility of understanding. The negotiation was about more than survival. It was about two different ways of seeing the universe. And humans were about to show the Archeli something they had never seen before. The Archeli world was changing. Something impossible was happening. For thousands of years, Archeli society had been perfect. Each individual knew exactly what to do. Each action was calculated. Each decision was logical. But now, everything was different. Yeonji Kim watched as the first changes began. Archeli scientists started doing something they had never done before. They began to ask questions that had no clear answers. What if there is more than one way to solve a problem? An Archeli researcher asked during a meeting. The words shocked everyone. In the past, such a question would have been impossible. Now, it was becoming normal. Jiho Kang was at the center of this change. He had studied humans more closely than anyone else. Now he was teaching other Archeli something new. Emotion, creativity, the ability to see beyond perfect systems. Training centers began to change. Instead of teaching perfect responses, they started teaching something else. Adaptation, flexibility, the ability to learn from mistakes. Archeli children began to play. They began to create art. They began to ask questions that had no single correct answer. Things that would have been unthinkable just months before were now becoming normal. The changes were not easy. Many Archeli fought against this new way of thinking. They believed in their perfect system. They did not want to change. But something was happening that could not be stopped. Daewon Park watched carefully. He remembered the first time he saw humans. Their messy, complicated way of living. Their ability to find hope in impossible situations. Now, his own people were learning from them. One Archeli Research Center began a new project. They called it the Human Understanding Initiative. They studied how humans solved problems, how humans worked together, how humans found creativity in chaos. The Archeli military was the first to change. They realized that perfect systems did not always work. Sometimes, they needed to be flexible, to adapt, to think in ways that could not be predicted by a computer. Yoongi helped create new communication systems, systems that understood emotion, systems that could process more than just words, systems that could understand the space between words. Jiho developed new scientific methods, methods that valued creativity over pure logic, methods that understood that the most important discoveries often came from unexpected places. The Archeli were learning something new, something they had never understood before. The power of imperfection. Archeli ships began to look different. No longer were they perfect geometric shapes. Now, they had curves, colors, designs that served no logical purpose except to be beautiful. Arcali music changed. No longer was it a perfect mathematical sequence. Now it had feeling, emotion, the ability to surprise. The changes were small at first, but they were growing. The Arcali were becoming something new, something they had never been before. They were learning to be more like humans, to see the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be explored. To understand that the most important things in life could not be measured by computers. To believe in something greater than perfect logic. To hope. The first joint Arcali-human exploration ship hung in space. Its design was unlike anything seen before. Part Arcali precision, part human creativity. Something entirely new. Commander Daewon Park stood on the bridge. Next to him, Elena Rodriguez watched the stars. They were no longer enemies. They were something else. Partners. Friends. Look, Elena said, pointing to a distant star system. Possibility. Daewon understood now what that word meant. It was more than just a word. It was a way of seeing the universe. Yeonji Kim worked at the communication station. His systems were different now. They could understand more than just words. They could understand emotions, context, the space between thoughts. The ship was full of both Arcali and humans. They worked together in ways that would have been impossible just months before. An Arcali scientist would have a problem. A human would suggest a crazy solution. Together, they would find something neither could have found alone. Jiho Kang watched from the science station. He remembered when humans were just data points. Now they were so much more. The ship moved differently than pure Arcali vessels. It was not perfect. It was not perfectly logical. It was something else. Adaptive. Alive. Humans had taught the Arcali something important. Perfection was not the goal. Growth was the goal. Elena smiled. The Arcali translation systems no longer saw it as a threat. They saw it for what it was. A moment of connection. Of hope. We're going to explore, she said. Not to conquer. Not to study. But to understand. Daewon looked at her. He understood now what humans meant by friendship. It was not a logical connection. It was something deeper. The ship's systems were a mix of Arcali technology and human creativity. When something broke, they did not just replace it. They improved it. They made something new. Yeonji watched the communication networks, Arcali and human messages mixed together. Not perfectly. Not logically, but beautifully. In the medical bay, an Arcali doctor worked next to a human nurse. They did not just treat injuries. They shared stories. They learned from each other. The ship passed an asteroid field. An Arcali computer would have calculated the perfect path. The human navigator saw something else. A chance to explore, to discover. Jiho looked at the data screens. They were no longer just numbers. They were stories, possibilities. Daewon remembered the first time he saw humans. He thought they were a threat. Now he knew they were something else. A promise. The ship continued its journey. Not with perfect precision. Not with pure logic. But with something more powerful. Hope. Possibility. The future.